how do these men make you feel about you? And I'll be honest, I think that is a question that is very telling, because it shows the virtuousness of the person that he's referring to. Virtue, of course, is outward focused, right? A core value is what I stand on, but a virtue is the impact that I want to have. So what impact is that person having on you? But here's the fascinating thing. Does that necessarily change as you get older on some level? It has a different flavor to it, right? Even in our mastermind group, right? We are challenging each other, sometimes rather boldly, right? But here's the fascinating thing. The fact that you can call me out on something and say, Oscar, I don't think you're seeing this correctly. Because I know your intent for me, I can even take harsh words or, kind of some black and white language, that kind of stuff.
Welcome to Authentic Conversations. I'm your host, Ryan James Miller, and I believe the way to freedom, fulfillment, and success ultimately comes by living as the most authentic version of yourself. If you're ready to live the life you've dreamed of, you're in the right place. What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today, I have with me a good friend, a mentor, a colleague, a peer. He's got all kinds of titles as it relates to me personally, a man that I love deeply and care about so much. We are in a mastermind together, except he's the facilitator for our mastermind. So that means he's a little bit smarter. So you're just going to get all kinds of knowledge today. He is a husband. He is a father. He is an entrepreneur and business owner. There's probably a lot of other things that he does, but for right now, we'll leave it at that. So why don't you welcome with me, David Osk, to the podcast. What up, dude?
Hey, man. Thank you so much for having me on. It's funny. I've been looking at your past, guests and so on, and to be included among them is a treat. And your mission in life is near and dear to my heart. And it's been near and dear to my heart really since I was a kid. I've had such a passion for, men, identity issues, how they lead, and, just this idea. And I like the idea of men taking responsibility. So, everything rises and falls on when men show up and when they don't. And the proof is in the pudding. So I love talking about this and whatever you want to talk about today, man.
That's so good. It's so good. And you won't know this if you're listening right now, for most of you, but David is like a dude's dude, like a man's man. Like David lives in Tennessee, and I got to spend a little bit of time with him a couple months back, and get to do that again here in a couple of weeks. Actually, by the time this podcast goes live, it will probably have already happened. But he's on this amazing piece of property. I mean, he mows like acres of grass. He has a mini little gun range on his property. He smokes cigars. He enjoys an occasional libation. And he's just one of those dudes. And I love that about him. So you're going to get to hear a little bit of that as we dig into this topic of manhood. And by the way, I want to remind you, there are so many competing messages for what it means to be a man today. It's a question that we're going to ask David and hear from him. And the reason that I'm having people on this podcast talking about this topic is because I'm trying to create a narrative, a story. We live in a world where there are millions and millions of men out there, and there are millions of women out there trying to tell men how to live too. And so there's just these competing messages everywhere. And so what I'm trying to do is get different perspectives that hopefully create a similar kind of guideline on what it means to be a man. And obviously we all have some different ideas about how we kind of get there. I don't mean like got here on earth, but how we kind of get there to achieving manhood, and how we practice that day to day, how we treat our wives and our children, and how we work. But by and large, you should be able to capture a really good idea, a framework, a blueprint for yourself. If you're thinking, how do I live as a husband or as a father or as a man? And so hopefully these episodes, this season 2 of the podcast, has been helpful in that. So with that, we are going to get David's answer, and then we're just going to run down rabbit holes, which is what we always do. I love it. I hear something, I pick on it, and we just go for it. So David, as I've asked so many other men so far, I want to ask you the same question. So what does manhood, masculinity mean to you? Like, how do you define that?
Wow. And yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a really easy answer to that. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. We were talking about, like if you were to throw masculinity up on a pie chart, right? What are the quadrants? What is it? Because there's so many things inside of it. You think about on a virtuous side, right? I mean, you think of things like honor, kind of coupled in there with truth and character. I think most people would say, a bit of maybe in varying degrees of being assertive, like you see disorder in your world and you're speaking into that disorder in some way, right? Whether work or home or, whatever that looks like. And then, of course, sexually, like, there's an identity around that with regards to, men and women, but men, it's different. And then there's a spectrum that's, kind of varying degrees, right? How that plays itself out in, in expression, all that kind of thing. And then I think very uniquely, is just the identity piece, right? You mentioned that. It's, well, what is that? Well, what do you identify with? It's the language around that, I think, seems to be a bit lofty. Like people kind of be like, oh, identity, that's, woohoo kind of stuff. But what is it, that makes you different from me, right? What are those identifying factors that would be identifiable even from the outside looking in? But then when I think about my own masculinity and how I'm, the impact that I want to have, what are those things that I have identified that are important to me that rise to the top?
That's so good. I love, I don't think anybody's ever specifically used the word virtue. You said virtuous, and it's very interesting because, it's not that a woman can't have virtue, really that high sense of moral standard, but usually historically, when we use the word virtue in virtuous, that has traditionally been assigned to a male. I don't even know what the kind of alternative is that is female driven or kind of like female assigned, but I really like that. So there's one thing that you said before I asked you to question, and I want to understand better how it plays out in this virtue. I love the assertive part too. We're going to get there for sure. But earlier you said this has been a lifelong journey you've been on since you've been a young man, young boy. You've been kind of on this journey. Obviously, we all are to some degree, right? We grow up, we're toddlers and then young boys, young men. But what did that journey look like for you? I mean, I've heard a tiny bit from you, personally about kind of like your family experience, but share a little bit about how that was ingrained into you, what you learned, and kind of how you've taken that and run with it.
Yeah, I think the kind of the unique aspect to that with me is that, every man, of course, has, a development stage of understanding, right? His place in the world, but then his place among other men, right? So I think to understand, your masculinity, your manhood, with regards to how does that play out among, when you're in a group of other men, there's kind of a pecking order sometimes, that kind of thing. And just, where's your spot there? Mm-hmm. And, when you're growing up, of course, you're looking, I don't know about you, but I mean, I remember being in like 5th and 6th grade, looking up to all the older, upperclassmen thinking, man, they're great. They're cool, all that kind of stuff. And feeling such a separation though, right? They're other. And I'm still this young guy. Well, then when you get to that spot, you realize, well, now I'm looking to, someone who's 4 or 5 years older than me now and feeling like they're other. And so there's this idea that I want to find that, everybody needs to find that progression for themselves. But here's what was different for me is I felt like I was really on a mission to help people, stay on that track and on that trajectory with a sense of purpose.
Mm.
And I and even still, right, much of my life and my career path and even casual conversations is naturally, because I identify with those things, is naturally drawn to helping people understand that identity, and especially with men, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's I don't know, it's so important. And I think the thing that I think that really stands out to me is when you are talking with someone who does not have a framework for understanding that they are at their very core biologically masculine. What does that mean? What, how does that play out? So if there's a big question mark over their head or in their heart, you see how that kind of plays out. And it's sometimes it's really painful. And sometimes there's these, fits and starts and stops, and they just seem like they're really struggling to find traction in life. And I've been there. I've had moments in my life or seasons that were very long that were, I just felt like what's my place? Where do I belong? What if I say I want, traction, what is it that I'm actually, stepping on? And having traction on, what's the bedrock of, my decision, making, matrix or framework and so on. And I love the process of understanding truth around this and helping other men get there.
Okay. Again, interesting there. I love the fact that, I don't know, I'm probably like 30 episodes into this season, speaking exclusively to men on manhood and masculinity. Had one wonderful woman on this season, right smack dab in the middle of it for a different reason, but nice. I'm still hearing new things. And I love that. And there was something you said in there that really struck me because of personal experience. So you talked about when you were younger and you were looking up to like upperclassmen, in a way, kind of like in awe, right? Like looking up to them, aspiring to be them.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one side of the equation. And so there is good that can come of that if you're looking up to the right people. Yeah. There's bad in that if you're looking up to the wrong people, because maybe they're the popular person. And that was, junior high playground, and that's right now, right, as adults. Yeah. The swing of that, which actually was a lot of my experience growing up, was I was constantly trying to prove myself to other people that I was as good or better than them. And really, I didn't understand that until probably 3 or 4 years ago, that was the result of my parents' divorce and feeling like I was less than, and constantly having to prove myself to my dad. Even though like it was more about me doing that than him asking for that. And so I had such a distortion of that I wasn't learning anything from anybody kind of above me in age or stature or anything. And so I would love to kind of hear your opinion on all of those different kind of capacities, and maybe the ones that you relate to more. Like, how do you feel, maybe like where do you see wisdom in following after, in kind of protecting against, as you've gone through your own life of being able to do that?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything we can do. Like we can't get around that, right? It is in our very DNA. I mean, even, scripturally, God says the older shall teach the younger. I mean, it's, so when you don't have that, that deep sense of self when you're young, right? Your identity comes from what people tell you about life and about you. Yeah. They're literally giving you, words that you can, right, and most of the time do, take into the center of your being that you believe is true about life, other people, and yourself. And so I don't think we have a choice in the matter. There's no, I think there are some people that may have, personalities or different, kind of wirings where they're maybe just a bit more skeptical of people in general, right? So they might sift through some of those messages a little bit better or differently for that matter. But I think in general, it's a good thing holistically, that we take identity from those who are further along in the journey. At the same time, there's that process of what is it, individualization, right? When you go from being a boy to a man, for a while there, you've got a foot in both camps, as it were.
Yeah.
But I think
like, how do you how do you decide, like, even now today, and maybe it's different today, definitely, than it was probably when you were a teenager or early 20s, but how do you today, like, really gain a good understanding for that's somebody that I should definitely look up to? And when we get to this age and stage in life, I think that oftentimes we can look up to people that are a little bit younger than us, but maybe that are just accelerated in certain areas than others. But do you have a matrix for that? Do you have like, oh, this guy fits into these buckets, and so therefore, I'm going to pay closer attention? Like, how do you navigate that so you don't end up following somebody that doesn't seem so bad, and before long you're like, holy shit, like, I'm way outside of who I thought I was supposed to be?
So, it's fascinating. As you were saying that, I was thinking, when you're young, it's the kind of the question is how does this person that I'm looking up to make me feel about me? You know what I mean? But does that necessarily? So if I'm thinking about, all right, I've got, so if you're talking to a 12-year-old and you say, hey buddy, you've got these 10 men in your life. Someone might be a coach, a teacher, pastor, youth leader, your dad's buddy, an uncle. I mean, there's these men in your life. How do these men make you feel about you? And I'll be honest, I think that is a question that is very telling, because it shows the virtuousness of the person that he's referring to. Virtue, of course, is outward focused, right? A core value is what I stand on, but a virtue is the impact that I want to have. So what impact is that person having on you? But here's the fascinating thing. Does that necessarily change as you get older on some level? It has a different flavor to it, right? Even in our mastermind group, right? We are challenging each other, sometimes rather boldly, right? But here's the fascinating thing. The fact that you can call me out on something and say, Oscar, I don't think you're seeing this correctly. Because I know your intent for me, I can even take harsh words or, kind of some black and white language, that kind of stuff. But it still goes back to, when I think of Ryan Miller, how does he make me feel about me? And I can equivocally say, he makes me feel like a champion. He makes me feel like I'm capable. He makes me feel like I'm shoulder to shoulder with him, right? I'm an equal. And I think that quite often that in and of itself, I think is super, super powerful. I don't think I've even really thought about that paradigm until this moment, but I don't know. What do you think about that? I'm kind of.
No, I mean, I think it's so wise. And obviously knowing you, I think one thing that you haven't said that's so important is you have this unbelievable gift to really see through people's bullshit. I guess that's a really good way to say it. Just in the sense of saying, like, because when you first said, how does that person make you feel? Well, I'm like, I look out online and there's a lot of people that make me feel really good about myself because they're trying to pump me up to buy their crap, or feed into their narrative because one day they want me to buy their crap. And so we don't want that. But I love that in there you said intent, and so we want to make sure that the people that we're looking up to, that we're following, that we're aspiring to be or to be like, that they have the right intent to really help us become us and not some soldier for them. But I think that requires an unbelievable level of personal wisdom, insight. And so where do you go to get that? I mean, part of that is lifelong. How old are you again?
47.
Okay. So 47 years of a huge roller coaster, lots of learning, lots of growth, lots of people pouring into you. And so that's part of it. But is there any other practice, or if a guy's like, how do I determine that? What kind of guidance would you give somebody that's asking that question?
So here's what's interesting is there've been a few people in my life that I've met who when I'm with them, I sense a couple things. They're really comfortable in their own skin. It's almost like they're looking at me while observing their own life at the same time, just thinking, man, he's doing great, and he doesn't even know what's ahead of him, but it's getting better. And but this, like, he's in a part of his process where he needs to have this this season that might be kind of hard, that kind of stuff. And he's not, so there's this sense when I'm with certain people, they're not trying to fix me. There's no strings attached. There's a sense of respect, and at the same time, because they're further along in the journey, they see things that I don't know about yet. And so their words are kind of comforting, or like, man, you're doing really great. Keep going. Mm-hmm. And I remember Dan Miller, the guy that wrote 48 Days, The Work You Love. I met him maybe 10 years ago, and he has been, and I told him this a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't seen him in probably a year and a half because of COVID. But what's fascinating is on several occasions, I've had like monumental decisions to make in my life. And I would just, call him up and, hey, I've got something, going on here right now. And we would have this really meaningful conversation, right? Like, he'd give me great, like very practical wisdom, sometimes, help me think through numbers and things like that. All right, David, man, have a great day. We'll talk soon, right? And I might not even see him for, 9 months or a year or something. And then we just kind of pick up where we left off. So there wasn't this sense of strings attached. It was this generosity of spirit in the moment to help a fellow sojourner rise higher. And then you just walk away, right? You trust the process, trust the processor, and do your thing. And I'm hoping that gets my point across. Like, there's a freedom with certain people. There's a generosity, of course, but then I tend to actually, let me put a pin here right in this word generous. I tend to be really attracted to people who are generous of spirit. So back to the topic here of masculinity, right? If you ask a man, to do something, I don't care if it's, help fold up the chairs at church or, whatever it is, right? If it's, or open a door, right, for a woman. I mean, there's certain things that you just kind of naturally gravitate to, a little bit of chivalry here and there, be the first one to, to act and to do something. Most men, that's kind of the way they are. The interesting thing, though, is there's a difference between that man and then a man whose radar is always up with regards to generosity, meaning he's constantly looking. Like, it may not be necessarily like this overt, I've got an agenda, but there's something about his spirit that is the radar's on. So when something comes up, he's just naturally gravitates to, oh yeah, tell me more about that. What do you got going on? Mm-hmm. If you're into it, man, I'm into it. Let's do this. What do you got? There's a generosity about their nature that is, I don't know, just really profound. And not everybody is naturally wired like that, but I'm really, really drawn to people whose radar is always up and how they can help someone else win.
Yeah. I love how that all got buttoned there together at the end, because I feel like, and this is not exclusively, but is characters of virtue in men, is this tenacity to fight and to grow and to learn. And I think that there are only two ways that you can get a man to a place where he's that gracious and generous of spirit, time, effort, energy, money. That's either if they are of the fraction of a percent of men that God created that way, and they just leaned into that from day one and have been that way. I have yet to meet a man that has been that consistent his whole life, at least from what I know. Sure. The other side of it, the people that I see are men that have been to hell and back as the result of being the exact opposite themselves.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, this was me in many ways. I mean, I was a reasonably good person. I got into trouble, but still, like I would, for the most part, respect women well. And, you know, I try to be respectful to other people and give of my time and things like that. But Ryan was first, you know, and little by little, I just kept destroying my life. The Lord finally just destroyed it all. And I had nothing at all. And as I came out the other side of that, I really had a decision to make. God gave me a decision to make, which was go back to being an idiot again, do it your way, and see where that leads you, or take those same characteristics that are in you and use them for good. And full throttle or nothing at all. And I feel like that's a big part of what's so attractive when it comes to aspiring to be other men, or to be like other men, is when they've been on that journey. And I actually hate that I just use myself as that example, because I didn't really mean to tie that to the end there. But I feel like when I've watched a guy go through it, learn from his mistakes, grow from them, and now is demonstrating these characteristics of that's a man. Those are the people that I really want to follow, because they've seen both sides. They've had the experience. They've had to intentionally commit to overcoming them themselves. And so I'm like, that's the person I want to be behind, because I've not only I personally been there, but like, I'm going to do it again. Like I pray to God, it's not in that kind of like disastrous fall, but I'm going to fall again, and I'm going to struggle. And I want the person that can relate to what I've gone through to some degree or another, and then can relate to how I climb out of the pit that I've fallen into. And so I love that you said what you said, because it just really triggered in me this, it's helping me. Like I can start to see that the guy, you know, like that's the person I want to follow because of these things and so many of the things you shared. And I think it's something that, again, men need to picture. I think as a business owner, we have like that ideal client avatar, and we can see the person we want to sell to and do business with. And it kind of sounds silly, but as men, I feel like we need to have that like ideal manhood avatar. It's like, I can see the guy that I want to be like. I got to find him. And when I can find somebody close to him, that's who I want to follow. That's who I want to aspire to be.
And so here's, I love that. And to have that, the avatar, I think is super important. And then real quick, back to something you said about, you know, I want to follow somebody who's been there, right? That's one of the reasons when I knew Dan's story before I knew him, right? Mm. And so when I knew all the stuff that he's been through in his life, all the hardship, well, of course I'm going to listen to that guy, right? It makes me think of that, you know, the old hymn that talks about thy dross to consume and thy gold to refine. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the going through the fire, right? It's heating it up. It removes the impurity. Mm-hmm. And so you've got something that is beautiful. And it's, you know, I think the language there isn't, even as I'm saying that, is it's worth something. It's worthy. So you're worthy to be listened to, right? You're worthy to be respected. And people feel the gravity of that, you know, like a gold bar, right? It weighs a lot.
That's right.
And there's a weightiness to that experience that allows you then to look at another man or woman for that matter and say, I get it. Right. And so, you know, knowing your story, right? When you put your arm around somebody and you say, man, I know what you're going through. It's going to be okay. Right. They're going to feel the weight of that in a beautiful, like powerful way, more than right their buddy doing that. Mm-hmm. And I get it. I know. Well, maybe he's thinking, no, you don't. And so I think there's the experience is is really something else.
Dude, this is so sick. It's so nuts because, again, all these conversations, and never one specifically like this. This is like money. If you're listening to this episode and you've never listened to another one, you're not going to appreciate how much I'm like just in this right now. So that's so dope that we're having this conversation. But I wanted to check this out. Like, listen to what we're talking about. And as soon as I start saying this, you're going to smile and nod your head. I know you are, because you're going to get it. Okay. So when we think about as believers in Jesus, why did God put on flesh and come down to the earth? Yes, ultimately to sacrifice himself for us. But why in the flesh? And we see in scripture and we hear in scripture over and over again, it was so he could relate to us and we could relate to him. If he wouldn't have put flesh on, we would have had a hard time relating in some way to how Jesus walked and what Jesus did. We can't be him, but we can definitely attempt to do our best to be like him, to model and emulate so much of his behavior, even in the way that, when the Bible says that, like, he was tempted in every way we were, but without sin. It's like, that's the person that I want to look to be like. And so I don't want to take away from what scripture says about Jesus, because ultimately that's what we need to be looking for. But behind that, there are these men of virtue that are walking the earth, like, in Hebrews, when it talks, this hall of faith and, all these men and women that went before us. Like, I look to that and I'm like, that's what I want. And so this picture is just forming so much more. It's like, David, you are just crushing it right now, because it's just coming together so well.
So can I take that to a deeper theological
level?
Let's go. So you and I are both Christians, right? And I think that I heard my pastor Scotty Smith say one time, and it just like a punch right in the face. He said you go into a lot of churches, right? Or you hear this language that that God is a God of second chances. And Scotty said, he does not give you a second chance. He gives you Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, so what does that do, right, for the masculine journey? What does that crumble inside of us in a beautiful way? What does that wreck inside of us in a beautiful way? Our ego, our pride, right? He is. I agree with you, right? To emulate him makes for a better life, but he's not someone to be emulated as much as he is someone that was the substitute, right? Because I can't. Yep. And I think that when what gives us the ability to look not only outward at another man with a lot of grace, but to look inward, to look in the mirror at myself as I'm going through this journey. And by the way, my journey has been just ugly. There's no getting around it. I've got a lot of high points, right? I really do. At the same time, holy smokes, for a big batch of ugly right next to it. Mm-hmm. And, but the substitute, I can look in the mirror with absolute delight. And I can look at you with absolute delight. I can put my arm around someone and just be like, dude, let's do this. Come on. I always tell Parker, whatever you're into, I'm into. Let's do this. There's no posturing anymore. You had kind of alluded to something else here that, putting on flesh. And I'm like, some things that I bristle against in Christianity is when somebody tries to tie a nice bow on something, right? Well, it's this way. And I don't care what anybody says. And there's probably going to be a lot of people that listen to this podcast that have no framework for understanding Christianity. Mm-hmm. And if they do have some understanding of it, it's a bunch of arrogant a-holes, saying one thing and doing another. Mm. So where does that bring us here? I love the fact that we can't tie a nice bow on this. There's mystery in it, but there is something, because there's no sane person alive from any country and any religion that would disagree that Jesus Christ was a man, right? They may not agree that he was the Son of God and rose from the dead, right? Like you and I believe. But he was very, very much a man. I mean, the entire calendar changed around his death, right? Or birth. And so here's what I love. And I heard this from, I think it was Tim Keller in New York at Redeemer Pres up there. He said, we may not know why God allows all of this pain and suffering and just all the chaos that we see, but we know one thing for sure is that he cares, because he showed up in the flesh, just like you said. He plunged himself into everything that we would experience. And then, of course, vastly more, because he took upon, he became sin, right? He took upon the wrath of God so that we would become righteousness. Mm-hmm. And so what I just love about the grace story inside, kind of that wraps masculinity, in this beautiful, safe package, is we can't lose. Mm-hmm. We can't lose. My identity is anchored to outside of this space, time, and history, to a tether that cannot be broken. Mm-hmm. He says that he will complete the good work that he started in us. I didn't say that, right? I can't complete hardly anything. Right. But when he says that I will complete the good work I started, well, then guess what that does? That gives me license to swing for the fence, because I cannot lose. Mm-hmm. And, I would just dare anybody listening, I dare you to take that into the center of your being. Mm-hmm. I dare you. Because if you don't, then your identity rests on your ability to be perfect all the time. Yep. And you will end up not only being really arrogant and judging people around you, when you are alone at night and you exhale and you sigh, that you let out a sigh, in that moment, you're going to be having major disdain for yourself. Mm. And it is the grace of God that unlocks every man's heart to throw his head back and run, because we can't lose. Yep.
No, it's so good. I mean, obviously, this just further solidifies, when I was asking you, like, how do you know who to follow? And even earlier when I was, kind of saying, like, how do you make these decisions yourself? And it so much is wrapped up in this idea that, we were created for a very specific purpose. We were created very uniquely and individually. Yes. Yeah. And we need to find that, obviously if, and I know there's people that listen that don't, but if you believe that God is who put you here, then you get to take that statement and run with it, which then gives you the permission. Like, once I know who I am, even if it's just to some very mild, mellow, and loose degree, like I've just started at the basic foundation, it's like, okay, these are the things that are virtuous to me. These are the things that I'm passionate about. These are principles that I will allow to cover me and to protect me from getting outside of that. And when I step into that with what I say is reckless abandon, and that's always taken bad, and I say, oh, no, like, throw yourself into being a man and have men around you, like we do, to support you and coach you. To earlier, you said to call you out on your bullshit, when you're speaking it or doing it, but at the same time to encourage you and build you up when you need it. Like, you can't fail. Yeah. But when you don't know who you are, and you don't take the time to try and begin to learn that, far more so if you don't have faith in Jesus, then where do you go? Well, you go to where the rest of the world goes, which is, I look at that guy and he's successful and he seems to have a hot chick, and I don't hear a lot of bad stuff about him, and he seems to do pretty nice things. So I'm going to go follow him. As a matter of fact, I haven't talked about this, but so I've been a pretty big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk for a while. I very much appreciate just his boldness to say the things he does. He can rub people the wrong way, but he talks a lot about empathy and kindness and all the stuff I love, And it's going to sound extremely judgmental, but it's just the reality of what it is. I know he's married and he's got some kids, at least one kid, but he never has brought them into the public eye. He's always said kind of that's the private part of his life. He just shares the business part. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. Like separate those things. And then about a month ago, he shared on social media that millions upon millions of people follow a picture of him with a new chick that's like half his age, very attractive. And the caption had something to do with the fact of like, love you or love this life or something. And I felt duped. Now, people could say, oh gosh, give me a break, rolling your eyes, because it's like, he doesn't have to be all things to you. And yes, that's right. But the whole reason that I was so intrigued by him and followed so much of what he says is because of the character and nature of a lot of the things that he was saying, even though he was rough about some of how he said it. But all of a sudden, something that I value so much, which is what we talked about earlier, like values alignment, something that I value so much, my marriage and my family, it was like he spit on it. And granted, his wife could have done something bad to him and left him, but he never gave any context to that. But now all of a sudden, like showcases this trophy on the other side. And I feel like that's so many men are being set up to that because it's like, it looks pretty good. I don't know what's underneath the surface. And before long, I'm like breaking into the bank to rob the place because it just felt like the right thing to do because the guy that I've been following for a long time is doing it too. So I just think it's so important to know what we stand for so we can know who to follow, who to look up to, who to try to follow to the best of our ability to help us become better men.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up just this whole idea that, when we look up to somebody, what if they disappoint us? Mm-hmm. And I actually had a conversation around that subject with a dear friend of mine. And he said, he's a really successful guy, wonderful human being. But he said, every time in the past, he said, I try to get close to an older man and I'd look up to them and try to, soak up some wisdom and gain a friendship, that kind of stuff. He said, I always feel like I got let down. Mm-hmm. But here's what's fascinating about that. And I'll be honest, I mentor probably 4 guys now in their 20s. And I often tell them, I'm going to let you down. Mm-hmm. But guess what? I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be like whoever God designed you to be. Mm-hmm. Right. I always tell them, I'm like, you're not going to find a better friend. I'm going to be in your corner. I jokingly say this, but I kind of believe it. I might be the best friend anybody could ever have. Mm. And I care deeply. I want, if I say I'm somebody's friend, I'm going to go to bat for them all the time. I want them to win, right? I want them to be happy. I want their marriages to thrive. I want their sense of self and career and impact rise, all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, man, I think that's where grace is so important, not only for ourselves, but anybody who, would aspire to gain a mentor, gain somebody to look up to, that kind of thing. Boy, show them a lot of grace. Mm-hmm. Like even as a dad, right? My son is 16, and quite often I tell him, hey, I've never been the dad to a 16-year-old. I don't know what I'm doing. Hmm. You need to know that I have noble intent and that I love you like with just crazy intense love. Mm-hmm. But I said, you need to show me a lot of grace, and I'm going to show you a lot of grace. But grace is not just a concept, right? It's a person. And if it's not, well then, right, then grace is the same thing as a peanut butter sandwich. It's completely irrelevant. And then we go back to the survival of the fittest, right? Then it's me over you every day, all day. You are not somebody to be admired. I might flatter you, but you are now my competitor, and I'm coming after you. And if I can get that 1 foot on top of your shoulder, I'm gonna be pushing you down, that kind of thing, right? And the beautiful thing about what I think is true masculinity and authenticity is that when you feel that sense of, uh, uh, I think really maybe the word is confidence mixed with peace, then you're not threatened by anybody else. You know whose you are. You know who you are. You have predetermined the things that you're going to say yes to and no to, the things that you stand on, the core values, right? Those things in my core that I value most of all, the hierarchy of those things. And then you realize that when you're that guy, when you're confident and peaceful inside, the only other logical option at that point is to lift everybody else up around you. It's the right thing to do, and it's almost altruistic. It makes your life better when everybody around you is winning. It's amazing, right? And go figure, right? It's good and godly. But I think that topic of being let down, by the way, that is really important. And you might even, I don't know, that almost would beg a whole nother podcast on how to handle things like that, because there's a lot of guys I think who have stalled out because they felt like they were sold something and then the rug got pulled out from under them.
Yeah.
But really what was going on there is they were wanting to emulate or follow or gain some wisdom and be pulled up by someone who was just human.
Yeah.
And they had them built up to be something that they just aren't, and they can't be.
Yeah.
So that's a big topic. And I think there's a lot of guys who've really stalled out because they feel like they got burned and they're not willing to go there again.
Yeah. No, I get that. It's so true. Okay. I'm going to land the plane because I feel like I love what you just said. Don't get me wrong. And I do. It's so valid. Like, there needs to be so much more conversation. But I think you so beautifully just put the back cover on what the front cover said. When you really spoke to virtue, assertiveness, which we touched on in there, we could have gone more there. But when you really talked about that, and the trajectory of our conversation went in the way that it did, and you just finished with, I'm just going to add a couple of words, but a real man is at peace with who he is. And good God, is that a holistic?
And he knows who he is, right? He has
Yes.
a clear vocabulary to understand why and how he's different from the man next to him.
Yes.
He can describe with clarity those things that make his energy rise, his convictions, things that motivate him, the things that give him, I like to say, his goosebumps, right? It's that the most, this sounds kind of maybe not so manly, the things that are most precious to me.
Mm-hmm.
That, if you know that and you feel peaceful in that space,
that's right.
I don't think there's a better head space and heart space to be in life.
There's not. I love that you said that. That's perfect. Like, literally. You should have written that down. Maybe once you listen to this back, you're going to write that down and you're going to go use that. Buddy, when you said earlier that you are the best friend, you are an unbelievable human being.
Thanks, man.
From the moment that we connected, I mean, I was immediately attracted to your character, your demeanor. As we've peeled back more and more layers over time, whether it was, over video or, sitting in your backyard or, wherever. I cannot tell you how much I deeply love you. And it is because of who you are. I mean, it's just, you are so aligned, and sure, you've got garbage just like everybody else. But man, the things you are good, you are so good. So thank you for the friend that you are. Thank you for the mentor that you are. Thank you for this conversation. There's definitely going to be more, but thank you. I really appreciate you.
Honor to be here, brother. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, guys, as always, if you have questions, comments, positive ones only for David, we'll put his contact information in the show notes. You can reach out to him. If you have other types of feedback, including the negative stuff, you just direct that towards me. You know where to find me. Keep an eye out, because very soon we're going to be announcing some content and some opportunities to get more involved into the Foundations to Freedom Academy, the men's coaching academy that we've been working towards, helping men break free from the prison of success. So it really aligns with a lot of what David and I talked about today and what I've been talking to a lot of the guests for. So keep an eye on that. That will be on my website, ryanjamesmiller.com. Outside of that, man, I normally say be you, be happy, be authentic. And that is a great way to sign off. But today, I want you to rest in who you are and be at peace in that. And if you are not, go figure out what it's going to take to be at peace. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you listening. Appreciate the support. Go share this with somebody else. I'm sure they'd love to hear it too. Talk to you soon. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Authentic Conversations. If you are ready to live the life you've dreamed of, I'm here to help. Head to ryanjamesmiller.com/podcast to begin your journey. And if this episode impacted you in any way, pay it forward by sharing it with someone you know. I'm Ryan James Miller, and I'll see you next time on Authentic Conversations.